Hello, everyone. Welcome to part two of Adjunct Reads a ChatGPT essay. In this video, I'm going to cover the body paragraphs and conclusion of this essay that I generated in part one. For those of us who are tuning in for the first time, I would recommend watching part one and also my addressing comments videos, just because you'll get a foundation in the first video of what it is that I'm supposed to be doing, and you'll also see me clarify that a bit in the addressing comments video, both of which will be linked down in the description. I think I come to some really interesting and I hope well articulated statements about what characterizes ChatGPT's writing in this piece and maybe in general as well, and why is that maybe not appropriate for academic settings where people like me are expecting a certain kind of work from our students. So, without any further ado, since this is a very long video, let's go ahead and jump over to Zoom and get started. Okay, so let's jump right in. Sort of where we left off, I do want to do a little bit of brief review of what I was trying to cover in the previous video, just to refresh ourselves a little bit. And if you haven't seen that video, you should go to the description. There's a link down there that you can go find that video and you can watch that if you like. But let's just review a couple things just to get ourselves warmed up a little bit. So the first thing, right, is the title. And ChatGPT in this case defaulted to writing a very uncreative title. Can we get it to generate a creative title? Yes. And I have had it generate a creative title, as we'll see in future videos when um, when I play around a little bit with ChatGPT to generate better essays, right? And I'll review those, but that's coming in the future. For now, let's stick with the first thing. So yes, we can get it to generate a creative title. In this case, however, it chose not to. It was almost like it defaulted not to write a creative title. Second thing is introduction format. And yes, there are formats to how different paragraphs are meant to be structured within themselves. There are many different ways to structure a variety of different paragraphs. And I do have a particular format that I teach my students that is meant to emulate pretty much every other conventional academic introduction paragraph that every other undergraduate's ever to write. I won't get too much into it right now. If anybody wants to hear me talk more about introductions, and the form that I teach, I'm more than happy to do so. It's a very well-established technique adopted by a variety of institutions as being standard. So I'm going to go ahead and get through this a little bit, right? We remember the hook or the focus section where we first make contact with our readers, right? It was fairly okay, obviously connected to the prompt. We get artificial intelligence, we get humanities, and we get this idea that it's been a transformative force. Is it too broad, perhaps? Is this maybe the appropriate first thing that we want to be saying to our readers in order to make contact with them? Maybe, maybe not. It depends on how specific our paper gets and how much knowledge we're presupposing for our audience, right? What does our audience already know or doesn't know? Which is a concern that I had previously in terms of I don't think ChatGPT was really thinking about specific milieu or audience here. It was trying to appeal to maybe its most default audience, which is anybody. It is an open source tool, right? So anybody could be using ChatGPT, and so it has to be able to talk to pretty much anybody. And I feel like that's what it defaulted towards in this particular piece. So again, focus is okay, clearly connected to the prompt, but it isn't followed up with any kind of elaboration. It isn't developed in any way. We're not taking our time in establishing that contact with the reader, kind of easing the reader into whatever it is that we're supposed to be talking about. It doesn't take its time here. If anything, this is a very quick introduction. And that's going to be a common theme as we continue through this essay, is that everything is very short, everything is very quick. So then we have setup. Setup information is important because that's where we get to give our audience all sorts of extra pieces of information. And this is where we are probably presupposing the most about what it is that our audience knows or doesn't know. And in this case, ChatGPT decided to begin with a definition of the humanities and a fairly non-committal and generalized one at that. The purpose of having a definition in your introduction is not to reestablish some well-established idea, but rather it is so that you are making absolutely clear that your understanding of a particular term is understood by your reader. And perhaps it is doing this here, but we generally only do that if we are using a more unconventional understanding of a given term or a more specific definition of a given term than is conventional. And that doesn't seem to be the case here. It's presenting a very conventional definition of the humanities, in which case I question, again, who is this for? And the answer, of course, is anybody. And again, that's not a very good choice in audience, right? I mean, yes, we do sometimes have to write for anybody and everybody. Plenty of sources do that. Tertiary sources, especially encyclopedias, Wikipedia, sources that are meant to be about generalized information, which I do think ChatGPT does an okay job of doing when it gets its facts right. It is a very good tertiary source in that respect because it can synthesize a number of different sources at once. However, when we're trying to have it generate more creative pieces, when we're trying to have it generate something like an essay, which it supposedly can do if we get it to generate it properly, it didn't perform very well here because it's used to writing in that very tertiary way where it has to be able to talk to anybody at any level. So the definition here of the humanities may not be very useful in, say, a class like the kinds of classes that I teach, where we're meant to consider audience more specifically. We're meant to be talking to a specific group of people with a specific degree of knowledge on a given subject, and that's what we're trying to presuppose or anticipate. And so, in a way, it did anticipate audience a bit, but not in a way that would be appropriate for one of my assignments. And then we have purpose statement, right? It's using a purpose statement in place of a thesis statement. That's usually what happens. This essay is going to do this thing, right? Which is a fine statement to have in some contexts. And I think that it's actually a very good statement for you to write yourself if you are trying to get any writing tips out of this. It's a great thing to sit here and say, my essay is going to do this, this, and this, right? Because then you have a clear idea of what your purpose is as a writer or what your purpose is as far as meeting your readers' expectations and your readers' needs. And so ChatGPT has in fact done something like this. There are some specific things with this that are wrong. For instance, well, maybe not wrong, but maybe less useful than what I would be looking for in a student for my class, right? This essay explores. An essay that simply explores doesn't really have a singular goal in mind, aside from just arbitrarily moving through ideas, which isn't necessarily very useful. Not every reader is necessarily looking for an exploration, but they may be trying to find a structured understanding of a given realm of knowledge, right? Or of a given subject. So we have to think about that a little bit. And what this does functionally is it creates a semblance of structure where structure may not really be, right? This essay explores the multifaceted role AI plays in the humanities, highlighting its contributions to research methodologies, data analysis, and the broader understanding of human culture. That sounds very nice, and we even have a nice rule of three at the end there, and that rule of three is actually what controls the rest of the sections of this essay. So that seems really smart, right? That this paper is actually sectioned off and we're outlining it here at the beginning of the paper here in the purpose statement. That seems very smart. It's a great thing to do, but what we have to worry about a little bit is, are we relying on the form of our words to create a structure that doesn't really exist there conceptually, or that isn't very strong conceptually? Are we using this outlining technique here at the beginning and then also its use of section headings later on? Are we using those as a crutch to replace actual instances of ideas connecting with each other and transitioning from one to the next in the words themselves, in the actual paper? And that is a crutch that seems to be present here in this paper. And in the other essays that I've worked with and looked at that I'll show in future videos, this is one thing that ChatGPT seems to have a crutch with, is that it relies on these section headings, on bolding things, on making things look like they have structure, when really the connections are very tenuous, right? They're tenuous at best, if we really try to dig deeper into them. And again, without a clear thesis statement, which I marked here, it's even harder to actually get a conceptual framework out of what is here. It is still relying on outlining ideas, putting them in an appropriate syntactical sequence in a purpose statement, and then simply following that format later on. But there's a lack here of a singular statement that ties everything together into one central claim, right? Now, even if we were to come up with a thesis statement for this paper, I think it would probably be too broad, right? Because the paper is too broad, and that's something that, again, ChatGPT tends to prefer. It is trying to operate, again, like I said, as more of a tertiary source meant to be informative and trying to deliver information as efficiently as possible, but not necessarily making connections, creating insight, or anything like that, right? So those are my thoughts on this introduction. It's broad, it seems to do some good things formally, but I can tell that there are some things in it that it is relying on, right? It's almost relying on a crutch here to create structure and to create the semblance of meaning when there may not be much meaning here if we dig deeper. But let's go ahead and dig deeper. Let's read on. Let's get into the rest of the paper as we promised. So I want to just start off. I don't want to jump right into the first paragraph of the body paragraph section. I want to just scroll through this a little bit and give you a little idea of what do these paragraphs look like visually. You will notice that I have changed the formatting a bit to be a little bit more consistent with at least what I'm used to reading as a adjunct professor, 12-point font, Times New Roman, double spaced, right? And that is just the mode that I'm used to reading in. Um, and that will also tell me a bit better how long or short are these paragraphs really. And in this format, I can really tell when a paragraph is underdeveloped or overdeveloped based on the length of the paragraph in this format or lack thereof. So let's just overview a little bit. We have its first section, enhancing research methodologies. We have two paragraphs here. They look short. They look very short to me. I'm not saying that a paragraph has to absolutely meet a certain word requirement or it has to be a certain number of sentences even, but I can tell when an idea has not been properly developed by how long the paragraph is. And even if these paragraphs are meant to exist in the same section, that doesn't really add much to it at all. These are both still a very short paragraph, even if I were to do this and I were to put it together. It's a little bit better if it was one cohesive paragraph, but it isn't. It's not presented that way. And when we read that one, you'll see that it's trying to make 2 points there. Similar thing in the next section, digitization and preservation. Very short paragraphs. Again, and if I was looking at this, and if this was a student, if I've been fooled, right, and I think that this is a student writing, I am going to be saying with every single one of these paragraphs, very underdeveloped. This is also very underdeveloped. This is also very underdeveloped. And again, we get underdevelopment because we're trying to cover too much ground with too few words. And again, that has to do with the fact that ChatGPT started off too broad, right? And again, can we do some prompt engineering to make it more specific and give it a better prompt? Yes, we can get it to write a better paper, a more specific paper. But I have some gripes with that perspective that I'm going to cover in probably my next video. What the role exactly is of prompt engineering, the more that I read about it, the more that I think about it, the more that I do it. What is the role of that exactly? And I have some thoughts about that. But yeah, we can get it to be more specific here. But it wasn't specific on its own, right? So that's also going to be a red flag. If this was submitted to me again by a student and they wanted to make me think that this was written by them and I just believed them just on, faith or whatever, I'm going to sit here and say these are not well-developed paragraphs whatsoever. Again, third section, facilitating interdisciplinary research, Two paragraphs, again, we see this two-paragraph structure all the way through, each very short, very underdeveloped, not much analysis going on. That's the key feature, actually, that I want to pinpoint with each of these paragraphs, is that there's very minimal analysis. Now, you might say, well, this is a more informative piece, I suppose. It did choose to write a more informative piece. I didn't say to do that in my prompt. I didn't say to write an informative piece, but it chose to write an informative piece anyway. Again, because ChatGPT is operating as a kind of tertiary source. At least that's how I understand it. As a research tool in that respect, it's fine for getting general information about specific things that you need to look up, but when it comes down to how does it default in how it writes things, it's going to write with that tertiary purpose in mind, in terms of it's going to inform as directly and as efficiently as possible, but it's not going to present much analysis. Now, I do have an analysis essay that I've had ChatGPT generate. There are a couple of literary analysis papers that I've had it generate. So in those, I want to take a look at how well does it actually do analysis, particularly literary analysis, because that's my field, but that'll be for another time. But when asked to do a simple essay, it provides no analysis whatsoever. And of course, by analysis, I mean, how are you connecting the topic sentence that you've written with your evidence? Or are you leaving that completely self-evident, completely implicit? Right? Which is not something that I teach. I teach my students to be very explicit in their connections when writing about their ideas. And that's what the analysis section is for, even if you're writing an informative piece. Facts have to be able to fit together in a way that you understand them, and you are then presenting that to me because you've given the ideas and facts structure, right? ChatGPT has attempted to give these ideas structure, not necessarily ones that are conceptually based, which are the most useful and the most interesting and the best for learning, but simply by making them seem or appear to have structure by the visual aspects of what it's doing, but not necessarily conceptually. And any conceptual connections that it does make are very simplistic. They're very tenuous lines of thinking, or if anything, they're very simple. So then we have the fourth section, I believe. There are many more sections than it outlined in the beginning, which is kind of a no-no. If you're going to outline your sections, you're going to outline your sections at the beginning. Augmenting creativity and interpretation. Well, that should be interesting to read, I suppose. Again, two incredibly short paragraphs, highly underdeveloped. I don't know how you're supposed to write about all the ways that AI has augmented creativity and interpretation in, let's see how many words this is just by highlighting. 111 words. So I'm supposed to believe that we're gonna cover really specific, interesting ground in 111 words about how AI has augmented creativity and interpretation, right? No, like set your reader up for realistic expectations as far as what is it that I'm getting into, right? How broad or how specific as am I going to engage with this information, right? Ethical and philosophical implications. Two very underdeveloped body paragraphs, and then we get to the conclusion section, which usually academic essays of 1,000 words or so don't have conclusion sections. Longer papers do, maybe of 10 pages could have a conclusion section where we're easing out of it. We're taking a couple paragraphs to do that. But nonetheless, we have three short paragraphs here, all trying to round things out into a conclusion when really it should just be one. Um, this is a very short paper. It's only 1,000 words. And as such, we don't need three paragraphs to ease out of it. We need one paragraph to ease out of it. There should be one thing that we're supposed to be getting from all the things that you're talking about and proposing, right? It should not take three paragraphs to conclude this particular paper. So now that we've kind of covered it, I want to emphasize again what I've been saying all along. There's very apparent visual lack of development for each idea. If we presuppose that every paragraph has its own idea, or even every section here has its own idea, each paragraph, or even if you were to combine them into one paragraph, are very short. And as such, they're very underdeveloped. Now you might say, well, I'm not going to believe you. They could be perfectly fine. Well, let's read a section, shall we? And you can tell me if you're satisfied with where this goes as an essay. Okay, so let's read this first section here, enhancing research methodologies. And again, you tell me if you feel like you've gotten what you wanted as a reader, or if you felt like you've come to a satisfying place as a reader in terms of what it's offered to you, in terms of what information it's given you, in terms of what analysis or connections or insights it's offered you. Or do you feel like there's something missing here, like you're still wanting something else, you're still looking for some other dimension of this that is needed there for you to really understand what's going on. So, AI has revolutionized research methodologies within the humanities by providing tools that enable more sophisticated data collection and analysis. For instance, digital humanities, an interdisciplinary field that combines traditional humanities with computational methods, leverages AI to process large volumes of textual and visual data. Text mining and natural language processing, or NLP, are two prominent AI technologies that facilitate the analysis of vast corpora of literary works, historical documents, and other textual sources. Text mining allows researchers to uncover patterns, themes, and trends across large data sets that would be impossible to analyze manually. For example, sentiment analysis, a technique within NLP, can assess the emotional tone of texts, providing insights into historical public sentiments or the thematic evolution of literary genres over time. This capability enables scholars to formulate new hypotheses and draw conclusions that are both data-driven and nuanced. So, for one, I think it's done a good job of at least exposing us to maybe things we haven't known about before. So, at least I didn't know about them before reading this, so that's great. I did know a thing or two about the digital humanities because my MA program had a concentration in digital literary studies, so I already knew a little bit about that. Um, so I think that I think it's good. I think that was a specific choice of topic, or at least a specific choice of example. But again, we start off very broadly here. It's revolutionized research methodologies within the humanities, providing tools that enable more sophisticated data collection and analysis. And I suppose that you could say, okay, more sophisticated data collection and analysis, those are all the different examples that we receive, right, throughout the rest of these two paragraphs. Okay. Now, something, however, still leaves me a bit dissatisfied with where this went. And I feel like if I'm trying to really understand what's going on here, I need another, even more specific report or example of where these things are specifically going on. For instance, if you're going to tell me that, sentiment analysis is a thing that's going on with digital humanities, right? And that it can trace the thematic evolution of literary genres over time, is there an archive that is using NLP doing this right now? Let's get very specific with this. Like, tell me about this archive that is using NLP to come to conclusions about the thematic evolutions in different literary genres, right? Tell me about that. What's going on with that? Like, when did that start, right? That's one of the things that I'm really looking for here is very specific instances where these things are really happening. But here, ChatGPT has decided to remain entirely in the broad, in the more abstracted view of, well, these are things that are happening in general, in places, right? And that's where I feel like some of us who are maybe a little bit more skeptical of AI tend to be dubious, right? We see something and it's speaking in generalities, and we're worried that it's hallucinating information. And that is a concern because if there isn't a specific example of some particular archive, library, group, research society, whatever that's actually doing this specific thing, then I'm less likely to believe that this is something that is going on. Plus, it doesn't give me as the reader any information as far as how can I really concretely imagine this going on in the real world, and what kinds of conclusions have been drawn from AI, from this AI technique as a result of using this AI technique, right? What kinds of conclusions have these scholars come to that were different than before? right? That would be a wonderful essay, and that's something else with each of these sections that it chose to write. As a result of being too broad, it has multiple sections, each of which could have comprised its own essay, right? Each of these could have been an essay on their own. These would have been more specific enough to be their own pieces, and even still longer than a thousand words, right? I think somebody could write a 10-page paper about enhancing research methodologies, the way that AI has enhanced research methodologies, or even specifically how NLP has been used by researchers to trace these kinds of things, right? You could easily write a longer research paper about that. Again, we're seeing ChatGPT not really understanding what is the scope that we're working with here, right? Um, Again, its default was to go with breadth instead of depth, right? And again, if you're a student who has decided I need to write a paper really quick and I'm just going to put in a prompt into ChatGPT so that I get my paper out and I can just submit it, you're going to be submitting a paper that has prioritized breadth over depth. But for somebody like me who's reading your paper, I am prioritizing depth over breadth, right? Because I want to see how deep can you go in terms of your own thinking, in terms of the concrete examples that you give, how specific can you get to back up your broader, more generalized, abstracted claims, right? Those are the important things. And that's why, in truth, composition teachers, English teachers, writing teachers are really in part thinking teachers. Just, maybe not as wonderful as maybe a philosophy professor would be, but nonetheless, we are trying to look at how deep your thinking can go as a result of what it is that you're presenting on the page. And again, we found a quirk here of ChatGPT. It prioritizes breadth over depth, right? And that is in every other decision that it's made in making this paper, right? So again, in prioritizing breadth over depth, it has short paragraphs that deal with here's the thing, and then here's also another thing, and here's another thing, overloading the reader with information about these various different things, right? Which again, can't we prompt generate that? Yes, we can, but nonetheless, we see without that prompt generation, it's going to default to bringing you a bunch of different pieces of information in a variety of different short paragraphs, right? Instead of going in depth with a particular singular topic and working from there. So that's what I'm feeling like I'm lacking when I'm reading this particular section. I'm lacking a certain degree of depth. I'm lacking a certain understanding from the writer's point of view that I can then take and react to properly. Again, the word unmoored is sticking out in my head here. The perspective, the writerly perspective is completely unmoored here, right? Because it's not really sure what angle it's trying to take, other than just, AI good, humanity is good. That's it, right? And because again, that's also very broad. That's breadth instead of depth, right? Now, I will read a couple more of these sections just to see if anything changes. Something that I found in both ChatGPT essays and in student essays is that I pretty much understand what you're going to be doing for the rest of the paper, formally speaking, unless if I have, very outlier instances where somebody does a lot of different things in their paper, which is cool, but I have to judge whether or not that's successful. But most of the time, whether it's ChatGPT or students, they will generally repeat their forms pretty consistently throughout their paper. So if they miss a topic sentence in one part of the essay, they're going to miss a topic sentence for the rest of the essay. If they don't present evidence very strongly in one part, it's likely that they're not going to present evidence elsewhere very well either, probably because they haven't learned the skill properly, and then it's my job as the professor to teach them that skill. So, understandably, that's going to be a consistent thing. Very much is the same here. What we see is ChatGPT repeating the same form throughout the rest of this paper. So I'll read a couple of these sections just straight through, and again, ask yourself, am I receiving the kind of depth that I want from a piece of writing that is meant to inform me, or am I getting too much breadth that I'm having to contend with myself, and I'm not really being given a cohesive structure or how any of these things are supposed to interrelate with one another, aside from just the broad idea that AI and the humanities, good thing. So digitization and preservation. The digitization of cultural artifacts is another area where AI plays a crucial role. By converting physical text, images, and audio recordings into digital formats, AI helps preserve these materials for future generations. Optical character recognition, or OCR technology, powered by AI, can accurately transcribe printed and handwritten text into digital text, making historical documents accessible and searchable. This has profound implications for archival research as it democratizes access to previously inaccessible or fragile materials. AI also assists in the restoration and preservation of cultural heritage. Machine learning algorithms can analyze and restore damaged artworks, photographs, and manuscripts. For instance, AI can fill in missing or deteriorated parts of an image based on its understanding of the artwork's style and context, thereby helping conservators to restore historical pieces with greater accuracy. The quality of content, I feel like, is similar to the previous one. We get some new things. We understand, oh, hey, here's another thing that's going on here, but we don't get any of that depth. I'm not entirely certain how we're supposed to be connecting that with the previous part. It tries to create a transition here at the beginning of this section here. The digitization of cultural artifacts is another area where AI plays a crucial role. Now, this is a common thing I also see with some students, that how we transition between one point and the next is saying, well, this is my first point, and here's another point that I have, and then here's another point that I have, which is fine to create the illusion of structure, or at least to say, well, I have a point here, and I have a point here, and I have a point here. But that doesn't tell me that word another, right? This is another thing, right? That doesn't tell me what the relationship is between point A and point B, right? Why is point A the first thing that we read versus point B, which is the second thing that we read? Why are they ordered in the way that they are in this paper? Right? What is the logic or reasoning behind the structure of this paper, and how can we communicate that in our transitions? Well, we're not communicating it if we're simply saying, this is another point, or this is another area where this is happening, right? I'm not saying that it's always inappropriate to do so, but what I am saying is that it's a very weak transition that doesn't do us any favors in terms of communicating what our connective insight is into how all of these things fit together. So that's a really big problem. Again, can we generate that? I don't know. In the samples that I've generated, I find that it's a little bit more elusive. Maybe it's better. I haven't really taken as close of a look as I want to with those particular samples, but we'll see in future videos if this is something that people want to see. But again, connective tissue here, it's very weak, right? We're saying here's one point, here's another point, here's another point. Here's one area where it's playing a crucial role. Here's another area where it's playing a crucial role. Here's another area where it's playing a crucial role. But we're not really getting an understanding of how all of these things connect properly, right? Aside from just all fitting under the umbrella of my topic, right? Very, very, very weak connection. Okay, and now this next section here, facilitating interdisciplinary research. The interdisciplinary nature of AI fosters collaboration between the humanities and other fields, such as computer science, linguistics, and social sciences. This collaboration leads to the development of innovative tools and methods that enhance the study of human culture. For instance, AI-driven network analysis can map relationships and influences among historical figures, literary characters, or philosophical ideas, providing new perspectives on intellectual history. Moreover, AI's ability to analyze multimedia content expands the scope of humanities research to include audio, visual, and audiovisual materials. Oh boy. For example, AI can analyze music by identifying patterns and structures within compositions, or it can study film by recognizing visual motifs and editing techniques. These capabilities allow scholars to explore cultural artifacts in ways that transcend traditional text-based analysis. So again, we're making some bigger claims here, and yet we are not backing them up in any way with any kind of concrete details. And it seems to do that at the ends, right? Where I'm expecting the analysis to come and it doesn't come. It just makes the claim and it moves right on, right? Really big problem there because I'm expecting, oh my gosh, what a big claim. That's awesome. But then it doesn't really follow that up in any way. So, for instance, the last sentence of the first paragraph here, AI-driven network analysis can map relationships and influences among historical figures, literary characters, or philosophical ideas, providing new perspectives on intellectual history. Great. What's a new perspective on intellectual history that has arisen as a result of this technique? What was a perspective that we had previously about some aspect of intellectual history? I know how has that changed, or how have we come up with a new one in comparison? That could easily be a really great developed paragraph there where we just talk about that and how one paragraph may not even be enough. But again, we're being really broad, we're not really going in depth, so we just leave it, right? And again, last sentence here of the next paragraph, these capabilities allow scholars to explore cultural artifacts in ways that transcend traditional text-based analysis. In what ways do they transcend traditional text-based analysis? That could be a whole thesis statement for a whole paper, for a whole 20-page paper even. That could be a really excellent research paper, and yet we leave it and then we go. And I mean, I wonder, I'm kind of interested now, what if I took that, made a thesis statement out of it, just edited it a little bit, gave it a ChatGPT, and tried to generate a more comprehensive, extended analysis of how these transcend traditional test-based analyses, right? That'd be an interesting exercise. I'm going to keep that in mind. Again, very strange. We get a claim, and this is good. I actually kind of am interested here, and then we do nothing with it, right? We don't back that up at all. Huge problem here from a writing perspective, right? From an informative perspective, from a tertiary text perspective, I wouldn't be expecting that, right? If I'm treating ChatGPT as it perhaps is meant to be treated, how most people use it as a research tool, this would be okay. I would be okay with this. I could dig more for myself. But presenting this as a paper, on the other hand, again, when I'm thinking a student has given this to me, I would sit there and say, wow, these are really powerful, strong claims that you're making, but you don't back them up. You don't get into them at all. And you have so many that it's like you should pick two or one even and just write a paper about that. So again, breadth over depth. That's again what's happening with ChatGPT here. I'm not sure how interesting it's going to be to read the rest of these. I will probably convert this to a PDF and see if I can maybe uh, attach it to the video, and see if I can make it available for people just so that they can see it for themselves. But we're only going to get the same thing over and over and over again here, right? So I'm not sure how beneficial it's going to be for us to continue on through these last two sections. It's going to be much more of the same, the underdeveloped ideas, the lacking of substantiation, which is depth, right? We go into it, we go into detail. The lack of concreteness in each of these paragraphs as it just moves from one to the next is really jarring. It's not succeeding in what it's trying to do as an informative essay. Maybe if we are just trying to get a broad swath of information, yeah, okay, we're fine with that. But it's not really doing a good job of guiding the reader through a cohesive understanding of various different events and facts and ideas, right? That's going to be clear and useful for a reader. It's not doing a good job of that, I don't think. Or at very least, there are many ways that we could improve it as a piece, right? Again, we might have to work with the language model further. If this is the essay that we got and we didn't like it, we have to work with the language model further to edit it, try to make a new essay, all that kind of stuff. And then we have the conclusion section. It's three rather short paragraphs. It should just be one moderately long paragraph, right? In fact, I wonder what would happen if we maybe put these together, but let me read it the way it is first and see what we see here. AI's role in the humanities is multifaceted, enhancing research methodologies, facilitating digitization and preservation, fostering interdisciplinary research, augmenting creativity, and promoting ethical and philosophical reflections. Again, re-invoking that outline there, trying to make it seem like there is structure there, but saying something is multifaceted and then listing all the ways that it's multifaceted doesn't really make me understand how all of these are meant to connect. And that's, again, the really important thing. How are all of these things supposed to fit together? As AI technologies continue to evolve, their integration into the humanities will likely deepen, offering new tools and perspectives for understanding human culture. The transformative potential of AI in the humanities lies in its ability to handle large data sets, uncover hidden patterns, and generate creative works, thereby expanding the boundaries of human knowledge and creativity. However, it is equally important to approach this integration thoughtfully, addressing the ethical and philosophical changes it presents. By doing so, scholars can harness the power of AI to enrich the humanities while preserving the human-centered values that define these disciplines. There's a trend here, and I've seen this in some other instances of ChatGPT generated papers that are very similar to this, where we have this three-part conclusion section with all the different subsections at the during the body paragraphs and all that, where it tries to be very even-handed, like there's some kind of ethical thing that we need to think about. We need to balance things out more. We need to consider this thing, right? And it does so in a way that is so vague and non-committal that it's a complete waste to have in this conclusion. Let me see if I can even read into this a little bit and get some meaning here, right? The transformative potential of AI in the humanities lies in its ability to handle large data sets, uncover hidden patterns, and generate creative works, thereby expanding the boundaries of human knowledge and creativity. I'm trying to see if there's something that I'm missing from that, but I'm just not sure that that's the best way that we could have put that. However, it is equally important to approach this integration thoughtfully. What does it mean to approach it thoughtfully? What does thoughtfully look like or mean exactly here? Addressing the ethical and philosophical challenges it presents. What ethical and philosophical challenges are those? I mean, this is what it does. I think I've captured it a little bit here. It refers to things only in the broad, right? It refers to things only in the most abstract way possible without actually naming what those considerations are in this case, for instance, right? The ethical and philosophical challenges it presents. What are they? Tell your reader what it is specifically that we need to be looking at. Not just, well, we need to be looking at the ethical and philosophical challenges. We should be looking at the ethical and philosophical challenges of anything that we're having any kind of stance on. What specifically for AI integration should we be looking at? Plagiarism, for instance, the replacement of human creativity or the outsourcing of human creativity perhaps might be one, right? The implications of consciousness, right? And what does that mean? Those would be specific, right? Or at least more specific than simply saying the ethical and philosophical challenges it presents, right? The issue of automation in general, for instance, would be another one that we should be able to think about. What are the most important ethical and philosophical considerations that we need to think about that are the most appropriate for this particular paper? That's what I would ask this student if they had actually written this, right? By doing so, scholars can harness the power of AI to enrich the humanities while preserving the human-centered values that define these disciplines. Okay, basically we should be able to learn how to use them as tools as opposed to using them as outsourcing. Well, good luck with that. But nonetheless, that might be something I agree with. In summary, AI is not merely a technological advancement, but a catalyst for a profound shift in the humanities. What's the profound shift? What is the profound shift that maybe can be traced throughout these different examples that you have presented here? Right? What is that exactly? Can you name it? Can you define that? And then, how much more specific would the essay be if we were to do that? It enhances our ability to study and interpret human culture, opens up new avenues for creative expression, and invites us to reconsider fundamental questions about humanity in the age of intelligent machines. Yeah, fine ending. I think that's an okay ending, actually. Um, Again, why is it three paragraphs? I wonder if maybe we could put them together and if that would look like a better paragraph overall. Yes, it would. I would say that's much more kind of the square that I'm looking for. I can handle that. I don't need everything to be in a separate paragraph there. That would be a bit better. Again, what irks me the most, I think, about how ChatGPT has written in this particular essay is how broad it is, right? How broad it tends to deal with things. Even when it's trying to deal with things specifically, it deals with them in terms that are too broad for what we're expecting and even needing as readers. And that's why, if we are just to simply put in a simple prompt into ChatGPT and maybe even more complex prompts, as I will show in future videos, it's not going to fulfill certain expectations that your professor is going to have, that even general readers are going to have, if they're trying to get some genuine understanding, enrichment, and insight from a given piece of writing. Okay? Um, again, the breadth over the depth, right? That's the key thing that we have to think about here for this particular paper. I'm sure there will be other things that we're going to think about in the future as I continue to read some of these and give my thoughts about them. I'm sure I've said some disagreeable things throughout this, so if you have anything that you need to address with me, go ahead and comment. Tell me what it is that I've done wrong, because I'm perfectly happy to change that and improve and do other things. But if I were to get this right, and this may be the source of my frustration a bit here, if I were to read this paper in Blackboard or in Canvas, right, and it has a student's name on it, I would be thoroughly disappointed, right? Because if they wrote this, it would show to me that they haven't been listening the whole semester, right? And that's a point. We understand, as I said in my previous video where I addressed some comments made on the first video, the more that ChatGPT has, the better it will perform. And if ChatGPT could have sat in my class for the whole module for a given paper, it may have written a better paper, right? If it had maybe the transcripts from all the lectures or something, and then absorbed that and learned from that, and then wrote a paper based on all the things that I was saying, that would be an interesting thing to do, because then it would have had more information to work off of, and it would have performed better, right? So again, I make reference to ChatGPT as if though it's at fault here. It's not entirely at fault here. ChatGPT is a tool, okay? ChatGPT is meant to be used as a tool, not as a replacement for human creativity, which is how some students use it, right? And try to use it. The fear is to outsource creativity to large language models, to AI, etc. And that is not the move that we want to make. And that is the basis for a number of other things that I want to talk about in the future. I'm sure that a follow-up video on this is forthcoming. I'm probably going to have some comments. Hopefully, I'll have some comments that I'll address for the future video, or I may even just rewatch this and put out a video and clarify some things after some reflection. Um, and that will be hopefully useful for some people so that I can really dig deeper into some of my ideas about this. But again, number one thing that I had a gripe with in this paper was the breadth versus the depth. It prioritizes breadth over depth, and that simply wouldn't fly in one of my classes. So, I think that'll finish us off for today. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate your attentiveness if you got it, if you made it this far. Again, if you have any comments about anything that I've said, please feel free to leave them down there. I will address them as soon as I possibly can and maybe even respond to them in video format. That would be interesting to do. Again, if you want to see me do other things, if you have ideas about, gosh, wouldn't it be interesting to see if ChatGPT could do this, or wouldn't it be interesting to see you, Andrew, talk about maybe this thing or do this thing in a video, whatever, I'd be happy to look at that and consider that as a possibility for a future video, because I do ultimately want to provide some value for anybody who's watching. So let me know in the comments what you want, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.